Hi, Andrew Mason, smallgroupchurches.com. Hey, I want to talk to you today about the why behind small groups. Many times in our small group ministries, we can do a lot of communicating and put a lot of effort into a lot of the hows and the whats with small groups. But I think it's really important for us that we have a strong understanding, a strong conviction about the why behind small groups. If we want our people to take those next steps in their spiritual journey, they got to be persuaded about the why behind small groups. And that's what I want to talk to you about in this video. One of the whys that I've seen thrown out there for small groups by churches is that, hey, if you go to a small group, you're going to find your future Christian best friend, right? The idea being that you're going to attend this group and there's going to be a person or a few people in there that you're going to do life together with, right? And become Christian besties. Now, is it possible for that to happen? Of course. Has it happened sometimes for people in small groups? Sure, right? Would I be against that happening for somebody? No, of course not. But from a preaching standpoint, promotion standpoint, communication standpoint, I wouldn't recommend that. I wouldn't recommend that, because what you're going to do unintentionally is you're going to put a lot of pressure on this fragile and new small group experience that people are experimenting with, right? They're going to show up to this group for the first time, for the first few weeks. They're going to look around the circle and go, do I see my potential best friend here in this circle? And honestly, many times they're going to look around and they're not going to see that. And frankly, they don't need to see that, because when I think of Jesus' small group with his 12 disciples, I don't believe all those guys got along and all those guys were best friends, right? But the one thing that they had in common is that they all wanted to become more like Jesus, right? Jesus invited them. He said, follow me, I will make you fishers of men. And he didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk. He was a spiritual leader, and they all wanted to be more like him. And that was the common denominator for those guys. That was the common link that bonded them together. It wasn't that they all got along and thought everyone was great, but they all wanted to become more like Jesus. So I want to share with you out of Ephesians 4:14 through 16, what I believe is the basis for the why behind small groups here. And I want to share this with you here on the screen. Ephesians 4:14 through 16 says this: then we will no longer be immature like children. We won't be tossed and blown about by every wind of new teaching. We will not be influenced when people try to trick us with lies so clever they sound like the truth. Instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of his body, the church. And he makes the whole body fit together perfectly. As each part does its own special work, it helps the other parts grow so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. I'm going to say that last part again. So that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. Now, the companion verse of this passage is Colossians 2:19, which I'm not going to read for the sake of time, but I encourage you to check that out. I'll post it in the video notes below this. But as we're looking at this passage here, there's a couple things I want to point out. I love this development in here of an immature child or an infant growing up, right? I love that. And then there's this context throughout the verse of transformation. We see there, verse 15, that we're to grow in every way more and more like Christ, right? But then there's also this concept that as we're following Jesus, he's going to guide us to be connected to the body of Christ. He's the head, but the church is the body. He's going to guide us to be properly fitted. And the result of that is going to be that we're going to experience health, growth, and more love, right? And when I hear that verse and I think about those concepts, I'm reminded of when I had a football injury in the 8th grade, and I broke and dislocated my upper left arm and shoulder. And the old school way to help you, repair and heal and recover was they would set your arm in a cast in a very inconvenient, uncomfortable position for a long time and hope that it would heal right. And if it wasn't healing right, you'd have to break it again and start that process all over. If it did heal right, you'd have this intense atrophy in your arm, and it would require a long period of exercise to get your range of motion going again. But that's not what they did for me. I was actually at the time one of the first athletes with this type of injury to get pins. I got 4 pins inserted into my upper left arm and shoulder to set the bone properly. And within a few weeks, I was getting partial range of motion again. And originally they were going to keep them in there for like 10 weeks, but around week 5 or 6, they thought it was going so well. They said, hey, let's pull these pins out at week 7. So they pulled the pins out, and I was very quickly getting my range of motion back, which of course, eventually I got all of it back, and it came to full recovery to where I was able to play football again for years and other sports. And now it's fine. I've had no issues with it. Why was that? Why was that? Well, the key was that, it was set back into proper connection. It was fitted together properly. And this allowed the joints and the ligaments to heal and begin to nourish my body back to health. But it had to be properly set first. And that's what a relational circle of biblical community can do for us. I'm talking about like what we see with Jesus and his 12 disciples, what we see in Acts 2:42 through 47. They're meeting from house to house. A small group like that, it provides the conditions for connection that can lead to growth and healing, health, and God's love in a person's life. And Jesus is in the middle of that circle, causing transformation through fellowship, through food, through his word, through prayer, through mission. So think about this. Who doesn't want more growth, health, and love in their life? Most people want that, right? And so this is what happens when we follow the natural pattern of the human body, that as we're properly set or properly connected in the body of Christ, we're provided with spiritual nourishment and life and strength. There's a lot more I could say about how that happens in a group, but that's going to be probably for another video. But so here's the thing, why join a small group? Well, first off, we're saying, hey, attending church on the weekends, it's just not going to be enough, right, to get connected properly. But in a small group, you can fit together in the body of Christ for growth, health, and love, according to Ephesians 4:14 through 16 and Colossians 2:19. That should be the common denominator for people in a small group, a shared desire to grow and become more like Christ, to be healthier and to have more God's love as a disciple. And if everyone has that shared motivation, the group doesn't need to become best friends before begin to form an environment where people can flourish spiritually. So let me share this with you in closing. The why here behind small groups, it's going to be a proper connection to the body of Christ for growth, health, and love as a disciple. Pastor, do you know the why behind your small group ministry? And if you do know it, do your people know it as well? Make sure that you've laid a solid foundation for the why behind your small group ministry. God bless.